Sarita Gupta is a vice president of Women's World Banking based in New York. Could you tell me who founded Women's World Banking and why?
The idea behind Women's World Banking came out in a meeting that was held in Mexico in 1975. It was the United Nations' first International Year of the Women. And really they were gathering women from around the world to discuss women and human rights. And there was a small group that started to think if we could work on only one issue, because they were discussing domestic violence, economic access, education, the whole plethora of human rights. So if we could only discuss one issue, sort of focus on one issue, put all our energies behind it, what would that be? What would be that catalyst? And they decided that it would be economic independence for women, so that if a woman has the access to financial independence, then she can choose and she can have greater access to education, opportunity, well-being. And that's where the idea came about. And Women's World Banking was really set up. The first mission was to give women all over the world a greater access to the economies in their own countries.
Where did the idea of microfinance come from?
The idea behind microfinance, again, goes back to the mid-70s. There had been, by that time, several decades of what we call the Western world giving massive amounts of aid to the developing world, and a realization that a lot of it was not working. There were still many people who were left poor. So, Muhammad Yunus is credited as being the father of microfinance. He's an economist living in Bangladesh, a very poor country. And he looked around and he said, what is it that the poor lack? What is it that they need? And the answer is obvious: they need money. And all of us, in order to get started, have had access to credit. So the poor can't get access to credit. They can't go to relatives to borrow, because generally the relatives are as poor as they themselves are. And they certainly cannot go into a bank and borrow because they have no collateral.
How did Dr. Yunus solve these problems?
There are really three innovations that he came up with that are brilliant in hindsight. One was, okay, the poor have no collateral, but let's figure out a way to create collateral, which means collateral is basically if you're not going to pay back the loan, that somebody's held responsible. So he came up with a lending methodology where there was a group of peers that were given the loan, and they would be lending to each other, and the group held each member accountable for paying back. The second innovation that he came up with is that it is very difficult for the poor to gather a lump sum to pay back a loan. But if you can break up that payment into very small, regular payments that are coming out of your daily income, then it's feasible to pay back the loan. So what microcredit did was to break up the loan payment into these very sort of regular small payments. And the third was really an incentive system that the poor were not encouraged to borrow a large amount. They only borrowed what they could use in their business and then pay back. And if they paid back successfully, then they were eligible for a larger loan.
Do you have any examples of individual success stories?
Oh, I love talking about individual success stories, because this is what sort of gets us up in the morning and gets us to come to work and stay late and do this work. Since I've been at Women's World Banking, I've been to the Dominican Republic, Jordan, and India. So I'm happy to give you a story from each of the three countries. The DR is a more established economy, if you will, and so the woman I met had already had successive loans that she had taken from our partner in the DR. And what she did was to start out, she was basically selling food from her kitchen, making excess food and selling it to the factory workers. Took out a loan, sort of increased that business, and then set up a little cantina out of her living room so that along with food, she was selling cigarettes, beer, candy, etc. That business did well, took out another loan, and built a room on top of her house and started to rent it out. And so over 7 years, what she's been able to do is to completely build a new home for herself and rent out the old one. And this is going to ensure income in her old age, because at some point, she's going to be too old to work in the kitchen and to be, standing on her feet behind the cantina counter. And she's looking at these rental rooms that she has been able to put on as her old age security. In Jordan, I'll tell you about a young woman that we met. Sort of the cultural norm in Jordan is that a fairly old husband can marry again and marry a fairly young woman. So the one that we met, her husband was now too old and sick. So while he took care of having a roof over her head, she had absolutely no means of earning more money for herself or her kids. And at her socioeconomic level, it's not considered proper for a woman to go out and work. So the only thing that she was able to do was she had taken a loan to buy cosmetics and was selling them from her living room to her neighbors. And this was considered to be an okay business for her because primarily she was dealing with other women. But it gave her that sort of extra money to use for herself. And then in India, where I was recently, in the city of Hyderabad, and Hyderabad is this up-and-coming city, it's gleaming. Indians themselves are thinking of it as the next cyber city. But across town, they have slums where even now, both men and women have not gone to school, they're not educated, and their only recourse is to work in the informal economy. So the family that we met, the husband was a vegetable seller, so he took his cart and went out into the more affluent neighborhoods. The son had dropped out of school to join his father to push a similar cart, and the mother had taken a loan to embroider saris. And she did this at home, sort of in her spare time. And what she really wanted to do was to amass enough income so that she could cut out the middleman, because she basically got half of what that sari was worth because she was handing it over to a middleman, so that if she could buy the materials herself, embroider it herself, and sell it herself to the store, she could in effect double her income without doubling her labor.